control of the Fertile Crescent, and the Medes defeated the Scythians, who later aided them in destroying the Assyrian capital, Nineveh, thus ending the Assyrian state. The Babylonian Chronicle says, quote, "They burned the city into ruined mounds." And the savagery of the revenge is still revealed by the excavations. The Assyrian forces took another stand to the west, but were finally defeated by Nebuchadrezzar of Babylon in 606 BC. So Assyria came to a crashing end. Wasn't there for long. It established a huge area, took over everything from the Persian Gulf to Egypt, but then fell quite soon after it was at its height. Didn't leave much but compilations, not much in the way of innovation and stuff, just records. Compilations of written letters that the guy collected in his palace and his libraries and stuff, all the different kings. Just collected correspondence and stuff, huge libraries of it, which is fine, it works well for us, but they weren't so much innovative as they were just innovative in their size and in the idea of not putting up with crap, I guess, is part of the Assyrian thing. Not only are we not going to let you invade us, we're going to do our best to invade you. Assyria, skip just a bit there, we're going to skip several paragraphs. Assyria created the first purely military empire. The state was a great military machine. The army was composed of native herdsmen and foreign conquered peoples, and was a permanent force, excellently organized and trained. The offensive and defensive arms, such as were found in one of the rooms of Sargon's palace, were bow and arrow, long lances, swords, iron breastplates, shields, and helmets. Though the Assyrians probably learned the use of iron weapons from the Hittites, they were the first to use them on such an extensive scale. The infantry was supplemented by swift-mounted cavalry, a marked advance over the old heavy chariot, though this was also still used. Pause for a second there. The problem with the chariot, especially if it's an integrated and important part of your military machine, the problem with the chariot is that you can't go over very rough terrain with it. So, it limits your army if you count on it. Their new siege methods, fortresses, and siege machinery gave the Assyrians a distinct advantage in attacking oriental cities built of sun-dried brick. In addition, the great speed of their armies and their policy of frightfulness to conquered peoples made the name of Assyria a synonym for terror throughout Western Asia, and still today the nation is symbolized by the wolf and the tiger. Assyrian military annals present a long, monotonous story of stark cruelties, wholesale massacre, frightful tortures by flaying alive, and by all kinds of outrageous mutilations. The ravaging and burning of cities, enslavements, deportations, savage exhibition of the bloody heads of corpses on the battlements or the piling of them into pyramids, the hangings of the skins of flayed victims over the walls of the doomed city. Even Assurbanipal, the great patron of arts and letters, was not outdone in such savage cruelty by any of his cruder predecessors. So, they did their best to outdo their predecessors, not only in how much they collected and what kind of records they made and how many scribes they had and how big their library got, but also in how cruel they were in their exploits, how many cities they took over, how many people they killed. They competed in all these things. It has been suggested in extenuation of Assyria that militant imperialism has always been cruel, and often with far less excuse, and that it is unfortunate for Assyria that its imperial rulers were so frank in detailing all their cruelties. So in other words, maybe Assyria is not so bad, maybe everybody's that bad when it comes right down to it, but they were just very frank. When all allowance has been made, however, there is a distinct contrast between the humane spirit of Egyptian civilization and the inhumanity of the Assyrian, and the very frankness of the royal Assyrian annalists is an evidence that frightfulness was a dominant emphasis in their civilization. They were not confessing, but boasting. Pause for a second there. I have been accused of typifying an entire nation or whatever. How would you pass collective judgment on the Assyrians and stuff? And I'm not alone, I guess. I actually get I wasn't there, I didn't meet any Assyrians, but from what I've read in all of the books that I've read about the Assyrians they were really freaking brutal. And people collapsed in from all sides to attack their empire and help destroy them. And they loved the fall of Nineveh. It was celebrated. So, alright, let's continue. Assyrian administration and economy. I'm going to talk a bit about that. Then a bit about their literature and libraries. The greatest contribution of the Assyrian Empire to the future was its forcible unification of the petty warring nations and its efficient imperial organization of Western Asia. Now, it could have dragged out for, I don't know, another 1,000 years or another 100, or how much longer could it have dragged out like that? With the local kings all have their way. There's traditions that go back generations, talking about before Assyria comes and rises. You got all these local kings and cities and stuff that have their way. They got their traditions. They like to fight. They like to have little border wars. They like to quibble. Once in a while you take the city. It's usually a booty raid. You rob what you can. You don't try to keep the city. You just destroy it, come back. And Assyria decides to try a different way. And they sort of force change or progress, a new way of thinking. Everybody's like, why do you have to go and try to create an empire? We were having fun, just sort of fighting as little city-states, you know. But the day of empire had to come, and Assyria was one of its early manifestations. The imperial government made a distinct advance in the development of provincial administration. See, part of it was bureaucracy, just developing the government, the tools, etc. Continuing. Keeping a close surveillance over governors and subjects kings through reports, letters, and the beginning of a royal postal system. Right? Keeping close surveillance over them, make sure they're not planning a coup, putting together their own army, you know. Later, the Persian Empire took over this imperial system and extended it. So the Assyrians were not replaced by the Persians. The Assyrians were overtaken by them, sort of, in some ways. Through the unifying empire also, Assyria became a preserver and purveyor of its complex heritage to the west and the east, and made possible the intermingling of cultures and the freer intercourse of trade. Military aggression doesn't always mean that societies are cut off from each other and don't like each other. Military aggression sometimes means more economic activity is going to follow, because it led to more stability in the area and more trade. If huge areas are under the same government, that just follows obviously. The government of Assyria was a personal, hereditary despotism administered by officials directly responsible to the ruler. Extant letters still surviving, prove that the city inhabitants had considerable self-rule, and they were quite distinct from the agricultural serfs, who had no defined status. So this was all still floating. They take over these old traditions and stuff, but there's no new thing yet set up. It's a new system that has to be worked into. You know, serfdom and so on had to be invented. It didn't just pop right out. Contrary to the belief of Marxists, who believe that as soon as one person had more wealth than anybody else, you immediately had a class system. So no defined status for the serfs, yet over all of it lay the shadow of the military despot. The difference between the so-called Assyrian free city and the free and independent city-state that we shall meet in ancient Greece is wide indeed. Now, I put that in there just to alert you to the fact that this this last paragraph or two we went over here is in my Ancient Greece series, and then we skipped to this book's exhortations and statements on ancient Greece. But we are almost done here, because we're just talking about Assyria, then we can go on to Persia. Now about Assyrian literature and libraries. The Assyrians have left still fewer evidences of originality in other phases of culture. Their writing was Babylonian cuneiform, to which they added about 200 cuneiform signs. Later they employed the Aramean writing very largely. They have left little of their own in literature and science. Their great contribution was to adapt and preserve Babylonian literature, science, and codes. huge libraries of copied and recopied and recopied stuff.